Today I'm going to be working in my art journal to make my day 11 drawing for Inktober. Any of you who have been following me probably noticed that I'm not really using any of the prompts for Inktober. I've always felt that it kind of holds me back and it really frustrates me. So I just kind of draw whatever it is that comes to mind. And these are a few of the drawings that I've already made. And so I'm just going back and looking at them really quickly just to see maybe if I can find anything in these that I want to recreate for number 11. And I do see a few that I really enjoy. And so the one thing that I am going to do differently for this drawing is I'm going to use the entire spread here. And so I'm just going to be using a pencil and a pen for this, just like all my other drawings. And I'm also going to be using this one here. It's a brush pen. And this is going to help me out a lot because I am going to be filling some large spaces with a lot of ink. And of course, I'm going to use an eraser. And I may use a few other things here and there, but I think this is probably enough. So I am just going to switch up my light, and I'm just going to use this brush pen here to go around the edges to create for myself a little bit of a border. I think this is just going to help me not go to the edges, because I have noticed that when I'm trying to make little lines all the way on the edge of the paper, it gets really frustrating. Though I'm noticing right now that my marker here is starting to dry up a little bit. So let me take a second to switch it out because I really need this ink to be nice and dark here. And I did get these in a large pack. I think it's a pack of 10 or so. So once this runs out, it's nice and easy to just go and grab another one. I'll make sure to link it in the description in case any of you are interested in taking a look at these. So this one's nice and inky. So I'm just gonna go around the edge. I feel like this little piece that I glued right here is gonna give me trouble when I come in here to do the drawing, but I'll have to just kind of go with it. I try not to let things hold me back, even if I have to glue something in or just kind of add something. I just accept it and I just do my best to try to work around it. So I'm just going to keep drawing this along the edge. It's kind of messy, and I usually just check just to see if it's not staining the other side of the page, and it isn't. So if you're wondering what kind of paper this is a type of cardstock. It's not the heaviest cardstock. It's about 67-pound paper, so it's what's considered cover stock. It's still thicker, and I like using it to make my journals just because it's that added thickness really helps to keep some of the inks from bleeding through. And this marker is pretty good at not bleeding anyway, so that's why I like to use it. And so once I have that border in, I'm going to start coming in here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create these little, I guess, what are they going to be? Like these blobs, basically. And it's just because I just want to practice making some patterns inside of them. So it's just like a bacterium or just this very loose, free-flowing kind of shape. Because I am going to be spending a whole lot of time creating my patterns. I'm just going to do this part really quickly. Just a couple of little freeform shapes. I've got 3 of them. I do think I want another one. Just going to add a big one over here. And so I could make more, but I think at this one I'm pretty happy with these 4. So I'm just going to stick to these. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to start making a pattern, and I'm just going to pick something very simple. And so they're going to be circles. And I really do enjoy putting a little dot inside of each circle. So I'm just going to be doing that this time. I think it just adds just a little more interest. They almost look like if you had the tentacles of an octopus and they just have that little bit in the middle. So they're almost like little suckers. And I know that I've seen sometimes certain plants or succulents or even some creatures of the ocean that have that, other than an octopus, of course. I just don't quite remember what kind of animals those are. I just know that it's just like an interesting little texture. I think sometimes even the skin of an octopus, especially the ones that can change colors. It looks like that when their little pores are changing colors, and it just looks really interesting. So it's kind of what I think about when I'm drawing these. So as you saw, I just got started in the middle. It's usually what I like to do, especially if I have a large space like this that I'm going to fill in. I try to get started in the middle with the biggest of my shapes. And I am trying to do this as fast as possible, so unfortunately some of this is going to be a little messy. And that's really just because I'm working on such a large space. Like this, the total space here is almost the if you had an entire printer paper, so like an 8.5 by 11, maybe not quite that big. So I do believe that the width across was 11 inches, but the height of the book is maybe about, trying to remember, 6.5 inches or something like that. So not quite as much as a full sheet of printer paper, but definitely it's a lot of space to fill. So I don't want to be too delicate or too dainty, mostly because this is a drawing that I'm supposed to just do in one day and just move on. So if any of you are doing this and you're new to drawing, you might not want to take on this much work. I think I just feel more comfortable doing this every once in a while now, just because I've been doing this for a while. I have participated in the 100-day project twice, so I think it's kind of like helped me build up some of that ability to just kind of power through these drawings. And so that's what I'm doing today. I made a choice that I just wanted to create patterns in these kind of large blobs, and then I'll figure out afterwards how I want to fill the rest. And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm just kind of doing my circles, just lots and lots of circles. And so far, it's pretty good. My pen is behaving. Everything's looking pretty nice. And so as I'm working these little circles, all that I'm doing is I'm just working my way outward from the center. And eventually, once I start reaching that edge, so I'm not quite there yet, but I'm getting pretty close. As I start approaching the edge of that shape, something that I like to do in order to help it look less flat is I start making those circles smaller. So you'll notice as I start getting to the edge there, those circles start getting tinier. And if I'm able to, I might even make them so tiny that they almost vanish. Super, super tiny. And if I have little tiny gaps, I just fill those in with ink, so they're just black. So just kind of get in there. Lots of tiny little circles at the edges. So I just do this as best as I can, and I'm going to try not to stress out too much or think not too much about getting them in there all perfectly, mostly because once I'm done filling this area in with my chosen pattern, I'm still going to do some shading here, and I'm probably going to use a pencil. And so once I add that shading, it's going to bring it out that much more. So that's going to happen in a little while once I get all these circles in here. So you'll notice everything on the edge there, very, very tiny. And this isn't a perfectly, how should I say it? Like in an artistic sense, it isn't an exact visual representation, but for me, it's just a little exercise to almost create that look. I know that in official art, it's so important to really observe the way that shadows and light play together, and there are a lot of exercises that we can do in order to achieve that, and that is important if what you're trying to go for is realism. But I think that for me in this case, I don't really go for realism. I'm just going for kind of an illusion. And I really like to create drawings that are almost dreamlike in a sense, because that's how it feels to me, at least when I'm dreaming. Things aren't exactly the way they would be in real life. They're pretending to be. And so I'm just creating shadows and shapes in places that might look interesting, and that's what this is. Just changing the size of the little circles, making them smaller along the edges and bigger towards the center. So you can see there that they kind of got a little messy, and that's fine. All that matters is it just gets a little darker there, and that's what creates the illusion that maybe this little spot right here is pulling further away from you, from the viewer. And it's almost got a little shadow going there. That's the illusion that it's creating. And of course, that's not to mention just how much fun it actually is to just create that same shape over and over again. Lots of repetition. Because it's so strange. I think a lot of us would have thought that, oh, that's just so tedious. Why would I want to do that? But for some reason, our mind really needs this. Psychologically, emotionally, we're built to do this kind of thing, to just repeat these motions. And even if it isn't drawing, it's if we do anything else, if we like to do any kind of work with yarn, any kind of weaving, it's just repetition. And it can really help the mind out a lot. So this is why, at least this is why I do it. It's just to be able to take some time and just make circles. It's looking pretty good so far. I think that's why it's so nice, so satisfying to just use a nice simple shape. It's almost like you can't go wrong. You just make more of them. I know that there are some people that I follow on Instagram who make entire drawings, just circles, lots and lots of circles, big circles, little circles. It's just amazing. I don't know. I guess I just don't know how someone has that much patience. But then I draw as well, so it may not even come down to having patience. It may just be a need. It's fulfilling a need. And the work does look beautiful. So I do look at that and then I remember that, yeah, sometimes I can just draw lots of circles and that's absolutely fine. Lots of little squares or just simple shapes like that. So as I'm coming here to this area, I'm still filling in the rest of these circles, but I'm already thinking about some of the other patterns that I'm going to be using here. I'm already trying to work through kind of all the patterns that I know, all the designs that I know, and I'm thinking about I might want to make something that looks almost like fish scales, maybe. And there is definitely one that I used recently that I do want to create. I did say that I was going to be using it more in the foreground of some of my drawings, so I'm going to try to do that. So that's something that I like to consider while I'm finishing up areas like this. And I think mostly that's just because I don't want to sit here and kind of ruminate on anything that's probably not good for me to ruminate on. I know that some of you may also have kind of these tendencies to sit and think about the wrong things for way too long, and so I know I do that too. So one thing that's really important for me is to try to not worry about any other thing. Like I don't want to sit here and think about anything that kind of stresses me out right now. I have plenty of time to do that in at other times of the day. So right now, this is not what I do. I just think about my drawing and nothing else. So that's what's going on right now is I'm just thinking about some patterns and just some simple things that I can do in this drawing. As I finish these up, I'm just making lots of little circles. And I was also considering that I was gonna do the shading here with an ink wash. I do that quite often now these days, but I'm unsure about using the ink wash only because some of that water will seep through these pages and I don't want it to ruin the drawing that's on the other side. So I think in this case, I really am just going to stick to using pencil for the shading. Really only because I don't want any of that going through the paper, just in case. So you can see here that I'm just going around the edge of my shape with my pen. And I'm just making this nice dark thick line of black. And I'm really just doing this. This is a tendency of mine. I do it in a lot of my drawings. So if you've seen any of my other videos, or if you plan on watching any of my other videos, you're going to see me doing this a lot. This is a really good way to separate one zone from another. So if maybe there's some overlap in your designs or just anything that you feel that's in the foreground, like for me this nice wobbly shape, for me it's in the foreground. And so drawing this dark line, it's really going to separate it from all the other designs that I'm going to add to the page really soon. So I'm making sure that that line is in there. Because I think if I forget to do it when I come in later, it just makes it a little harder to add that in. So I'm going to just start coming in here into this lower region. And I am going to do something very, very similar to what I thought I wanted to do. So I was thinking of fish scales, but I'm going to do it with just a few more added lines. And so what these are these three little repeated arches. And you'll notice I am setting them up just like as if they were fish scales. So I'm just going to start a very light row right here on the bottom. And I'm just going to keep setting up my little arches right next to each other. And they don't necessarily have to touch. I think that it just so happened that as I was making these, they were just coming right up against each other. But when you draw them, you can leave little gaps between them if you like. It's really all just to create a little look. So you'll notice that once I have those, I'm just going to start overlapping similar arches on top of those in between them. So they're going to be kind of staggered. And as usual, as I reach the edge, I'm going to try to make that design even smaller so that it again looks like there will be some shading there. And this one is a little harder to do, but I'm just going to try my best. Just see if I can get that design to get nice and tiny right up along the edge. I'm just going to try to add little lines. But most of this shape here is just going to have these arches. They're pretty simple to do, and they don't need to be perfect. I think that maybe a few years ago when I was first trying out doing a lot of this kind of doodling or drawing, I really did have this impression that every line needed to be in the right place. And thankfully, I've gotten over that for the most part, and I realized that lines don't have to be perfect. Lines don't have to be precise. I I don't even need too much symmetry. It's okay if they change and they move, and you'll see it. A lot of my lines here are very messy, and that is perfectly fine. It's it's so much more important, at least in my opinion, to just learn to accept the way that things come out. I know I've heard from so many people that their lines don't come out perfect. I know I've heard some people have pain. I know I have that myself too. Sometimes my wrists hurt because maybe I just did a little too much that week. And I'm not even talking in terms of drawing because when I draw, it doesn't hurt my hands anymore. I've learned to hold the pen better. I've learned to practice this better, so it doesn't really give me any pain, but sometimes just the work that I do at home or cleaning or doing other things, my hands end up hurting just because scrubbing things and dragging things around can be a little stressful for the hands sometimes. And so even through the pain, even through the discomfort, it's so important to accept just what comes out. Like right now that I'm drawing this, I do have a little bit of discomfort in my wrist on my right hand. So as I'm drawing, I'm finding that some of my lines are coming out not exactly the way I want, but I'm just going to let that happen. I'm going to accept that some of this is going to come out a little messy, a little imperfect, and imperfect is normal. Because I think that once I really learned to let go of that need for perfection, I really started to just learn to experiment so much more. And so that's what this is. These kind of drawings, if you see me just kind of going at it, just really trying new things out, it's because I'm not afraid anymore. I don't want to be afraid anymore. Especially not of my paper. My paper has nothing, it's got nothing on me. I can scribble and I can doodle and I can just whatever it is, it's just a piece of paper. If I don't like it, I can put it in the trash. And if I do like it, I can put it in a nice folder somewhere and I can look at it later. There's nothing wrong with making mistakes. So I'm going to try my best right here to make these little arches nice and tiny up here at the top. It's probably going to get a little messy. So that's good enough. I'll just leave it like that. So I think that I do want to come over here and make my thick line, but I'm going to switch over to my marker for this. I completely just forgot for the previous one, and I do have a marker that I can use that for. So I'm just going to give myself a break here. Just use this. Just go along the edge. So one thing that I am noticing right now is that because I am working in my art journal, I've got that split in the middle of my spread here that's going to be a little annoying, so I'm going to have to deal with that at some point. But right now I'm going to do this pattern right here actually, and I'm going to do it in this little blob. I feel like I probably should have drawn a bigger shape to draw this in, but I think this is big enough for now. So I'm going to start just by making this little loop, and I'm going to add a couple bellies to it. I'm not going to explain exactly how I'm doing it right now. I'll kind of talk you through some parts of it. But if you are interested in seeing kind of my thought process behind doing this one, please check out my patterns playlist. This is the last one that I did right before this. That's why, as you saw in that drawing that I just referenced, it's the whole page is done this way. And you can watch that one to see exactly how it is that I do it if you are interested in drawing this kind of thing. But all that it really comes down to is it's a sequence of little loops that I just continuously attach to each other. And so right here, you notice I just started a new one. It's a little loop and a little belly. Then I just carry it over and just create either more bellies or more loops. And I can keep attaching them to each other. Like right there, I just added another one. Then I'm going to add another one, and I can switch directions like this. But like I said, if you want very specific instruction on how to do this, I do have a video dedicated to this exactly, and it's called Drawing Mycelium, because that's what this is going to look like. I think it's going to be like this nice little tattered network of shapes that kind of go under and over each other. And currently it really is one of my favorite patterns to draw. I've really been perfecting it lately, just kind of figuring out new and more interesting ways to play with it. So it is very much one that I'm drawing a lot. So you'll probably be seeing a lot of this. So what I'm doing here is I'm just adding more of these. I'm not worrying too much about whether I make the patterns tighter along the edges. Right now, I'm just really focusing on just getting the right shapes because I'm still very much practicing it. And it does get a little complicated on the edges, so I'm kind of just creating these little dark bubbles along the edge and just doing my best. And I'm doing my best to change the sizes and the shapes. I know that some of them I do want them to be small, and I do want some of them to be larger, so that's what I'm doing here. Just kind of changing it up. This one definitely is a lot more complicated than some of the other patterns that I have, but I really do love it so much. It creates such an interesting little mesh of fibers and tendrils, and it's super satisfying. I think just sometimes when a lot of us draw, we want to draw things that are, hmm, I don't know how else to put it, but I think that we want to draw things that are pretty, like just traditionally pretty, like let's say flowers and leaves and just nice, pretty little appealing things. But I think that there's also so much appeal in patterns that may be a little different. So like this one right here, it does still look natural to me. Again, because I do think of it as kind of like mycelium. It's very natural, but it's also maybe a little scary. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's the kind of patterns that you might see in art that's more supposed to be like, oh, if someone drew a monster and it's got like this strange texture, especially right now that we're in October, so there's a lot of Halloween stuff going around. And I imagine this could be a texture for the surface of some scary things. And unfortunately, I don't really know how to draw monsters or any of that, but this might be a fun one for anyone who does that kind of art. Nice interesting texture. They could almost be like something's growing on top of something. So for me right now, I'm just keeping it simple and I just have this little blob on my page and I'm just covering it in the pattern just to see how it looks because I'm just having so much fun experimenting with this. And so I'm just going around here. I hope this is going to look okay. I haven't actually done this design this way, so I'm just kind of keeping my fingers crossed that when I add some of the shading in here, it'll really help it look more dimensional. But I think so far it's coming out pretty nicely. So I'm just gonna go with it. Again, I'm trying to be a little more fearless and just accept what happens. And so I'm just adding more of these little loops. I'm just kind of going around doing my best to just fill in the space. And it really is just so interesting that just adding this little line, adding this little loop, it just starts coming to life. I think that personally, it just, every time that I draw, that's got to be the most amazing thing to me is just a piece of paper that had nothing on it, and now all it takes is just a series of lines to start creating an image, and it's just so good. Even something as silly or as interesting or as strange as this. Just a few lines, a few swirls here and there, a couple of circles, and you've got yourself a little bit of magic. And that's all that this is right here. It's just little loops. And I add a loop on top of another loop on top of another loop. And sometimes I just start a totally new set and then I just keep going and just hope for the best. And maybe this is just my this might just be my math brain, I suppose, but I really do always think of these as kind of algorithms or just iterative values where it's just I just took one thing and then I threw it into a random value generator and now it's just repeating it but in a slightly different quantity. Like I said, it's just a little bigger, just a little smaller, just a little different each time, but it's just doing it over and over and over. That's what this feels like to me. Like I'm just randomly generating. And I know that there are some programmers out there who have made some really amazing programs that I've had a chance to play with. And they do create things like these actually. Maybe not exactly like this, but they do make some really interesting patterns and some really nice designs just using mathematics. And so I think that that's probably what I think about when I create my own here, even though they're done by hand. I think a lot about that, about how some of these things can be modeled using math. And of course some very, very intricate programming, but it's doable. So here I just used my brush pen again, just went around the edge, and I think that looks pretty good so far. Let me zoom out a little. So these are the patterns that we have so far in a little blobs. And I'm going to take a few minutes right now just to go ahead and do some of that shading because I really want to see what it looks like. So I'm just going to come around. I'm using one of my most favorite pencils. This is a General's Extra Dark pencil. Again, I am going to make sure I link everything in the description. I know sometimes I forget, but I am going to make sure this time because I know that some of these are supplies that some of you may not have and you might want to take a look at them. So, so far this shading is looking pretty good, I think. So here it is. This is the General's Layout Extra Black number 555. I like this pencil a lot because even though I do have other pencils that are about this darkness, I still think that this one does way better than the other pencils. Even from other pencil sets, other pencil brands, the General's pencil, I still enjoy it the most. I don't know why. It's just the one that really, really does the job much better. So I'm just using a blending stump right now. And you can see it gave it lots of dimension. It looks really cool. So let me go over here and add some of that shading to these our other interesting little blobs here. And you can see that I'm just going around the edge. That's all that I'm doing. It's pretty messy. It doesn't have to be too delicate. Any of you who are new to my channel will see that my pencils are very long, very pointed. I also do that on purpose so that when I'm shading, I can really just lay down my pencil so that I can create these lines really quickly. I do also have a video for that if anyone is interested. But basically, all that it is that I have a special pencil sharpener that creates long points on my pencils, and that's a nice, easy way to get that. And then, of course, you can use an X-Acto or anything like that, and you can really get your pencils to be nice and long like that. But there are sharpeners that do that. So here you see there's the shading on that one. See, it's already bringing it out so much more. So that's really what I'm looking for, and I just love that it works up so quickly. Just a messy drawing here along the edge. I'm going to do this one too. I still have one more shape over there to work with, so I'm kind of just trying to figure out what it is I want to do with that last shape. And as I reach this little edge here, I'm also trying to figure out what I'm going to do with that seam in the middle of my layout that I'm going to have to deal with when I get to it. So right now I'm just using my blending stump, and there you have it. There's some of my quick shading for our shapes. And if left like this, it looks like there are holes in the paper. But I am going to be adding more, and it's going to change the look of this whole thing. But right now we're just going to come over here and do this last one. And all that I'm going to do here I'm just going to do these little swirls. I think I just want to do something simple. So I'm just going to make these little spirals. And just like before, I got started in the center or close to the center. And basically all I do is just work my way outwards from there. And towards the outer edge, just like before, I will have smaller shapes. So my little spirals are just going to keep getting smaller as I get out to the edge, just like with the other ones. It's just to help create that depth, just a little bit of depth. And I will come in here and I will use my pencil to add some shading as well. I'm just making all my little spirals here. And a few of them do get a little messy, and that's okay. In the in the grand scheme of things, all those little messy spirals are not going to be seen. They're just going to kind of fade. They're going to fade into the background. So I'm just going to keep adding a few more here. It looks like I'm almost done. I know that with the swirls, it's a little more difficult to fill in with with tiny shapes along the edge, so I'm just going to do my best. And like I said, I don't worry about it just because I am going to go along the edge with the pencil to create the shading. So I'm just going to get it started by making that dark line around the edge. So there we have it. There's that nice dark line. And I'm just going to bring my pencil back in here and just make some more of that shading around the edge. And then just going to come in with my blender just to soften it up a little. So that looks pretty good. I'm pretty good with that. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just doing my best. And as you can see, it is a little bit shiny. That's kind of the downside of graphite, but it's still good. It's a lot of fun to play with it. And so I'm going to start working over here on this edge, just creating a couple of shapes. because I do have a lot of space here in the background. And so you'll see I'm just making these simple, long contours. There's a lot of space to fill in, but I'm already thinking that I want to be cautious about how I fill it in. I don't want to put a whole lot of patterns back here. So as I start filling in, I think I'm just going to stick to these kind of contour shapes. And I'm only going to use these a couple of times. So you'll see I still added those dark lines around the edge of that. And I'm going to make a few more of these long contours here. It's going to make it look like they're these sort of long leaves kind of growing out from here. Just these nice long shapes. And I am doing this on purpose actually. When I choose to do this in a drawing, I'm doing it because I want there to be varying shapes. So far what I have are like these little blobby, stubby shapes. That's how I think of them. They're very, I'm trying to find the right word. They're very solid. So those initial shapes that I drew, which are in the foreground, they are very solid shapes. They're stable. They look like they're stationary. And so to counteract that, I'm creating these shapes that are long and flowing, and that kind of balances the weight of those large stable forms that are in the drawing. So this is why I do it. So you may notice in quite a few of my drawings, I create these kind of long ribbons. And it's my way of balancing it out. So I'm just going to keep going here. Just add a few more here. And I'm also going to probably add a few more throughout the drawing. I think because for starters, it's going to take up some space really quickly. So you saw all it took was just a few lines just to take up a good amount of space on the drawing. It's very simple. It was just a few contours, just some nice long flowing lines. So that's the first thing. It takes up space, which is good. And then secondly, it just helps add more dimensions. So here they are, what they look like so far. And it helps really stop that drawing from looking like it's all just sitting there like a bump on a log. So it adds more motion to it. And so I'm going to add a few more over here. My lines are a little bit messy, and I'm not going to worry about it. Just going to do my best. I will be adding shading in a bit, and that should help with some of the issues here. So I'm just going to keep going. I'll go around the edge of this with that brush marker. Create that nice thick line. Okay, so there it is. This is just going to separate it from the designs that are going to follow. So here we have, this is what it looks like right now. I could add a few more of these, so it's going to be up to you if you want to try something like this. So I think I'm just going to go to the background and I'm going to use this one right here. I really enjoyed doing this one. There's just nice flowing lines and it looks almost like tangled up string or hair or something like that. So I think I'm going to fill in quite a bit of the background with this. And let's see if I get started here in the corner. I hope I'm not biting off more than I can chew. It's probably going to be quite a bit of work. So let's see what it looks like when I come into the background here. And I usually just start with just a couple of simple curvy lines, especially if I'm starting in a corner, and I'm just going to keep following them just to see what they look like. And unfortunately, this is kind of the only thing that bothers me about working in my art journal is especially once I'm towards the end of the journal. So like right now I'm about 4/5 of the way through it. I'm having to hold up this kind of thick, chunky surface and really do my best to draw on it, even though it's not a smooth paper. Like if I just had my paper on the desk, it would be easier. But because I'm on the book, it's a little difficult to kind of control my lines there. But it's not too bad. I think that the only thing that I'm doing that I'd like to do differently is to have a different thickness. So this is about how thick the pen is, but I think I want my lines to be a little thicker than that. And it's probably going to take up way too much time for me to keep doing it with this pen. I'm going to try doing a few more. Yeah. So I think that I really want my lines to be thicker. And I'm trying to decide why I want the lines thicker. I'm actually not sure why, but I think that it might be because in my mind, I feel like this is the background. And whenever I draw things in the background, I want it to be darker. And so I feel like one of the easiest ways for it to be darker in the background of my drawing is for the lines to be thicker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to a different pen. I like this pen a lot. That's fine. It's done a great job so far, but I'm going to switch over to another one that I like a lot. It's the Fude Nosuke by Tombow. And this pen does help me make thicker lines because it is a brush pen. So let's see how this works, if this works out better. Okay, so definitely this one is what I want right now. It's giving me those thicker lines. Again, because of the brush tip, it's really the only reason. And I do think I like that a lot more for the background. Okay, so I think I'm just going to stick with this pen. So what you'll see that I'm doing is I'm making these curved lines. And I just allow those curves to follow each other. And just at different times, I decide to just change the flow. So sometimes it breaks up and then it just starts somewhere else and stops somewhere else. And it's fairly random actually. This is why this is such a therapeutic way to draw is they're just lines and they just stop and start pretty much anywhere where you see fit. And just that very random flow of lines creates really interesting effects. And depending on the person, it can come out completely different. This is just how they look because that's how I draw them. But I've seen other people draw these totally differently and they have a completely different look. So this is really just how they look when I do them. And occasionally I try to switch the direction of them and you'll notice it's all it is just contour lines. And then I just change where they stop, I change where they start. And just by doing that, it just creates this really lovely flow. So I'm really just going to keep adding lines here. And when I come inside of one of these little spots here, when I enter a spot like that, I'm going to have those lines come closer together just because I think it should be darker there. And then I'll just carry on over here all the way to my edges. And I think this is something else that this pen is helping me with because the lines are larger. It's helping me fill the space much faster. Because as much as I do love drawing, I also don't want to overwhelm myself with too much to do. Some people do ask me if, well, not if, but how long the drawings take me. And there are some days where they take many, many hours. I admit that. Some days I might work on a drawing for 5, 6 hours in just one day. And that's probably because just mentally I need that. So I'm perfectly happy to be able to work on something for that many hours. But truthfully, I don't always have the time for that, especially when there are other things to do. There are always other things to do. And so when it's like that and I don't have that much time and I maybe I only have an hour or even 2 hours, I just I have to do things to kind of help myself out. And so this is one of those nice things that I can do is decide to use a larger pen. It's a very easy thing to do. It seems almost silly to say it, but just switching over to a different marker, a different pen, and I can still draw. And so when people ask me how long it takes to draw these, it's just going to depend. It can take a while, but of course, I want to make sure that I'm considering what other things are going on at that time and maybe how I'm feeling mentally. If I want to sit for a few hours and if I can't or I don't want to, then that's when I want to use a different pen like this one, or maybe I just want to use a smaller sheet of paper. Whenever I came into this, or when I come into a drawing like this and I'm already thinking I'm going to do a full page spread, I certainly am already considering just the amount of time it's going to take. So I think in this case, I came into this knowing that it was going to take a while, but hoping that I wasn't going to spend 6 hours on it. That's a bit much right now. So this is very much a compromise of two worlds here. I am doing my best right here to limit the amount of work that I have to do right here at the seam. You'll notice I'm trying my best and to be a little delicate around this area. I'm going to draw this little orb here. It's basically a circle just because I don't want to have to draw along that entire seam. It can be a little tedious. So I'm just trying to work around that. So you'll see right there, the lines don't exactly match up, but I just did my best by turning them around. I'm going to move over to this other side here just to kind of give myself a break from that particular spot, just because it kind of makes me go it makes me go a little cross-eyed when I'm trying to pay attention to my lines and to that seam in the middle of the page. So I just kind of moved over here just so I can focus on a different area in the meantime. So over here, I'm just going to keep doing my lines. And I really am enjoying this pen a lot right here. This is a fairly new pen. I do have a nice little stash of these, and it just has such a nice feeling to it when it's a brand new pen and just so much ink is flowing. It's pretty good. So I'm really enjoying this. So something else that I am thinking about right now is I have been practicing a lot more with my dip pens. So some of you may have these already. They're the kind of like these calligraphy pens. And so what you do is you dip the pen into the ink, like India ink or just calligraphy ink. You dip it and you get to drawing with it. However, the thing is you do have to keep dipping it pretty regularly because the nib or the tip of the pen only holds so much ink on it. And that was usually something that me in my impatient years just wasn't very happy about. But I think recently I've really been appreciating it for what it is. So occasionally I do get that dip pen out. I get the ink out and I just practice dipping and drawing, and I think it just becomes part of the flow. So I'm hoping in the future, in the near future at least, as I start feeling a little more confident and a little more comfortable using it, I might be able to share some of my uses of that kind of ink, because I really do think that it does have its own charm about it. And I feel that at least in recent times, I've been just drawing so much that it's starting to become a problem for me, just all the pens that I go through and I throw away, and I just don't feel happy about that. So I'm starting to desire a way to draw that doesn't create so much waste. And I think that's going to be it for me. Or at least that's where I'm going, I'm heading towards as I practice, is just being able to have refillable pens and having pens that I just dip in the ink and things like that. So I think I'm slowly making the switch, really only just because of how much waste this produces. Like this pen right here that I have, this Fude Nosuke, it's very good. It is a very good pen and I love it so much. And unfortunately, if I were to only use these pens, I would go through so many of them. Not only because I enjoy the pen so much, but just because of how much I draw. I draw so much. So I am looking into different things. I'm looking into pens that are refillable. And there are actually plenty of them out there. So I'm really enjoying that at least. I As soon as I'm able to, I will set aside some money and I will start shopping for pens that refill. So they're almost like fountain pens, but they're more for artists, for actually drawing. And they have like nibs that can change out, that are, yeah, that can be changed out. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for. We'll see. If any of you have any suggestions, please let me know if you've tried any that you really like. Any brands, please, please, please let me know. I would love to know what kind of things I should look out for. I know that one that I've seen, or actually a very inexpensive one that I've already tried that was pretty good. At least so far, I'm good with the with how it's worked. Is a, my goodness, what is it called? It's a sailor, I think is what it was. It's made in Japan. For some reason, I tend to really gravitate towards the Japanese pens, because in the past I've bought pens that were just other random brands, and they didn't work. Like I remember one time for my husband's birthday, I bought him a really nice. It wasn't a calligraphy pen. It was just a pen for daily use, and it was refillable and it was really lovely because he also really likes nice pens. And I got that for him, and unfortunately it stopped working after he only used it a few days, and that just made me really upset because it was a very nice pen. I I did a lot of research shopping for it, and presumably it was supposed to be good, and then it turned out to just stop working all of a sudden. And it's just that kind of thing that I'm worried about, especially if I buy a pen that's $50 or $60 or something like that. It would be unfortunate if it didn't work. So I did try that one. I believe it's called Sailor. I did get the inexpensive one though. It's about $10 and it's working pretty nicely. So I'm really happy about that. And then the other things that I've been using for drawing this way, for a dip pen, because the Sailor pen is a refillable pen, so that's what that is. But as far as dip pens, I've just tried really basic ones, like from the art store. Usually there's like Speedball or a few other companies that make little small sets for, like, for comic illustrations. Those are the ones that I get because it comes with three different nibs that are, some are fine, some are thick. So it is. I'm doing a lot of experimenting. It's a lot of fun, and some of it's a little scary just because I don't really know what I'm doing. But again, I'm trying to just really get out there and just try things out. And thankfully, because I do share my art, a little bit of that revenue that comes from the ads here and from the support of so many of you, because I do receive tips occasionally from you, and that's wonderful. Thank you so much if you have sent me. anything at all, truthfully. It's very much appreciated. I'm able to use that to go and experiment with new art forms. So currently that's what I'm trying out. I'm trying dip pens so that I don't have to throw away so many plastic barrels from all these wonderful pens. So as I experiment with those things, I will share with you and really show you the difficulties or just the benefits of using those kind of things. I do still have quite a few of my other pens that I've kept in my stash, and I'm just working through those right now, just using them. But also I'm looking for new ways and new methods to be a little less wasteful. At least as a personal goal. I know that as far as drawing comes, it's one of my main ideas has always been to just use what you have. And so for the most part over the years, I just draw with what I have. Whatever pen I have, whatever pencil, it doesn't really matter. I think just recently I've been looking into really making a profession out of this. I have been receiving some commissions and those really help too. It helped kind of push me toward being a little more serious, more professional about it. So that's what I've been doing is I'm trying out new things. So let's take a look at this. This is what it looks like so far. It's pretty good. So just been filling in that background with all these contours. You see I have all this space over here. Lots and lots of space still. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start switching it up just a little. So I want you to see what I'm doing here. I'm just making a few tendrils. So like this. And then I'm filling in the rest of the space with black. And so as I work my way around here, I'm going to continue doing that. So here's a tendril, just a little bit of stuff here, and then black. And then I'm just going to work around and make these little shapes and then fill in with black. So you'll notice now that my black spaces are starting to get larger, much, much larger. And there actually is a reason for this. At least for me, for when I make these drawings, there is a reason. And just like before, one of my reasons is that this helps me save time because it is very easy to just fill in a space with black. So let's come down here to this area. And I'm just going to continue doing what I was doing up above. I'm going to fill in spaces with black. And then I'll make a few little lines. And then fill these larger gaps with black. So this is helping me save a little time. But there is another reason. It's not just about saving time. The other reason has to do with the weight of the objects. So as I'd mentioned before, those big shapes that I had initially created, those were in the foreground of my drawing, at least when I envisioned it. Those are in the foreground, so those create a lot of weight, like in a stationary kind of sense. And then I added those long flowing forms so that it looks like there's a little more motion in the drawing. And then now that I'm working here in the background, there's another type of weight that I have to think about. And that is the weight created by the lightness and the darkness of the shapes. So when I looked at the drawing and I saw all of those nice, beautiful contours, one thing that I noticed was that there still wasn't enough black in the drawing. So just by looking at that, I realized that I wanted to add some weight in terms of black color. So not just weight of an item in the drawing, but an actual weight with the black. So as I come over here, you'll notice I'm filling in many more spaces with black. I can actually switch over to this other pen. This pen is not, it is not waterproof though. This one, if I were to add any kind of wet medium over this, it would smear. So I'm trying to keep that in mind. I won't use anything wet over this when I'm done, but it is great for filling in the background. And you'll see that it actually looks just fine. It really does help add more variation to the drawing. So you'll see here what it looks like. There's spaces that are very dense with pattern and then spaces that are a little bit more spread out. And that's, to me, that's again another way to add variation without really changing the designs too much. It helps add weight in different places to the drawing. It helps it look a little more natural. So I'm just going to continue doing that, and I'll find different places where I want there to be more or less weight, and I'll just kind of keep playing around with that for a little bit. So for starters, I'm just going to work over here. I will definitely be using this pen a whole lot. So I'll just be switching every time that I need to do just a few contour lines. I'll just use the Tombow pen, and then I'll just use the bigger one to fill in. I'll just fill in a few in between just to kind of continue that look. So here's another one right here. So I'm just doing my best to kind of spread them out. And just fill in between. I know that it can feel a little counterintuitive. I know that when a lot of us are drawing, we might really feel like it's necessary to fill every space with a pattern or to just really work in every inch and just kind of fill it with designs. But and maybe if that's not you, that's all right. It's just I know that for me, and I've heard a lot of people say it, is that we just need to fill everything, and that really isn't necessary. It's actually there's this strange kind of counter to that. So I am filling it. I'm filling it with black ink here, but I'm not actually filling it with any designs. And it's again another one of those things I've had to fight. Just this kind of instinct. So here's what it looks like so far. There are quite a few just large black spaces, but it's not entirely black. I think it helps a lot that I have those little tendrils there to break up that space. So it isn't just a whole, like this huge area that's only black. I think it helps. So I'll just come in here. And again, I'm just going to keep going. I think this is just what I'm going to do all the way to the end, is I'll just finish up this whole area here. And I will just let these extend out to the edge of the drawing. So like this. And I'll just come in and fill in with black. And as I'm filling in the end here, I am also starting to think about what kind of things I want to do for the shading. I know there's going to be quite a bit of it because again, I'm really going for a lot of shadows, a lot of darkness, a lot of ink. That's why I'm already pretty happy just adding so much black ink everywhere. There is going to be a lot of shading as well. I think mostly as I share this drawing, I'm really thinking a lot about One of the ideas that I wanted to convey to you with this is that even a drawing that seems like a lot was involved, I wanted you to be able to see that it wasn't that complicated. Maybe in some ways it does require some skill. I do know that some of these things that I draw, it's because I practice them a lot, so some skill was required, but the process itself wasn't entirely super complicated. So you'll see here it was a sequence of lines that I like to draw. It was just a handful of patterns. And maybe after that, the other thing that's going to really make all of this come to life is going to be the shading. So that will come after this, once all these lines are put in. And maybe that does require some skill as well, but again, the process itself, it's not too outlandish, it isn't too much. These are things that can be done in a single day or even just a few days, so it's doable. I think it's perfectly doable. So whether you are experienced and you already have your own set way of drawing or of painting or creating, all of these things are achievable. And so for this one, I really am showing you every step, every line, every little thing that I did, just so that you can see everything. So here, this is the end of this. I think that's all of it. So let's look at the whole thing again. So here it is. Every spot has been filled in. I have all my shapes in where I want them. So you saw me draw every single one of these. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with my pencil. It's that same pencil again. I'm not switching between different pencils. And I'm going to come in along the edges and along any of those spaces where the lines are very close together. And you'll notice that I'm just adding that graphite. It's a little messy. And then I come in with my hand or with my finger and I just spread it around. I could continue to use the blender. It's just I think that when I'm working very intuitively this way, I prefer to use my hand. I don't mind getting the graphite all over my fingertips. It's fine. So that's what I'm doing right now. And by adding this shading, I'm throwing all of those nice little wavy contours further into the background. I'm going to add some shading to this piece too because it still looks very flat right now. So I'm going to try to fix that a little. Still a little messy, but that's okay. Just going to spread that out. And it does make a huge difference. Just adding all this graphite in, like I said, unfortunately, it is a little shiny, so it makes it difficult to take photos or to take footage like this because it is going to start to shine, but it is good to get practice with it. At least I think so. Whenever I don't feel like using graphite, then I have lots of other ways. Is I can do an ink wash or I can use other kind of gray inks or even just work on it digitally. That's also something else that I can do. But for now, I'm just working in my journal, so the pencil's fine. And I know that I'm not perfectly smoothing everything out either. It is staying very textured in a sense. The messy graphite doesn't smooth out entirely, and I actually kind of like that. I really like that it ends up just a little messy, just a little unrefined, and I don't mind. So right here, I'm going to try using the blender in this area, so you'll see what it looks like. And just coming in with an eraser a tiny bit just to clean up some areas. And then I just keep going. And you'll notice that I'm not even covering up any of the drawing. I'm not worried about transferring any of the graphite. For whatever reason, even if a little transfers, it's not too big of a deal for me. Mostly only because there's just graphite everywhere. Even if I get transfer, it doesn't interfere with anything. So just keep working my way around. So right here, just a little shadow, and over here on the other end, just add another one. And again, just so you can see that it's kind of messy, but it helps. Even messy shading can help a lot. And if you use, of course, I can just come in with a little bit of an eraser. If there's anything I want to fix, I can just tidy it up a tiny bit like that, and that's fine. So already all this shading is helping so much. Most people do tend to shy away from making things dark like this. So this has always been a something that I work on. Is how can I add more darker tones or darker colors without it taking over entirely? And so this is one of the ways that I do it. Is even after I create with ink, I add a lot of gray tones using something like this, or maybe using that ink wash that I like to use. Anything like that, just to see how can it help. And it doesn't even have to be exact. That's kind of the funny part with all these, because these are very abstract forms. It is perfectly fine if they end up in some strange places. It's okay. It's just important to create a nice variation of grays throughout the drawing, and it just helps. It really helps. So you'll see this is what it looks like. I'm trying to hold it at a different angle just because my lamp is creating a lot of shine. So I'm holding it just so that you're able to see what it looks like once I add that in. And I'm going to do my best when I'm done to take a good photo of it so that you can see what it looks like when it isn't shiny. Maybe I can take a picture outside in some natural light. That might be fine. So I suppose that overall I could say that this definitely is a lot of work. You've seen everything that I'm doing here. I've gone through all these steps of adding all this ink and all this graphite, and it really was a lot of work. I'm definitely not saying that it's not work, but also it doesn't mean that it has to be hard. It does not have to be hard. It's just time-wise. It takes time, maybe some patience, a little dedication, trying to figure out what it is that you want to achieve in your drawings. What is it that you're trying? What are you trying to go for? What are you looking for in your drawings? And this is what it is for me. This is exactly what it is a lot of shading, a lot of depth, trying to see what else I can do just to make everything look like it's more alive, like it's moving around. And so all I have to do is add a little gray using some graphite here and there, and everything just comes so much to life. So here I'm just going to add a little bit more. Looks like I don't have that much left to go. It's getting a little messy. This is perfect. I know I do wonder sometimes when I'm doing all the ink work, why it is that I bother to put so much detail in sometimes, because as you see, when I come in with the graphite, it kind of covers over some of that. And I don't think it particularly happened here, but maybe in some of those forms that are in the foreground, when I added all that graphite around the edges, it almost entirely covered up. the work that I did there. All those teeny tiny little circles, those tiny, tiny little swirls and little shapes, they got covered up by all that graphite, and it feels like, well, why did I do all that work then? But I think that when I look at it, especially when I look at the drawings later, I can really see that even under the graphite, you can see the patterns. And it's very subtle. And that really adds a certain level of, I don't know what word to use without it sounding wrong, but kind of a certain, like a finesse to it. Maybe I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but it looks a little more refined. That even in the areas where it's dark, even in the areas where it's almost entirely black, there are little details there. Hidden a little, but you can still see them, and that to me is part of what I love going back and looking at some of these is I know that it took time to draw all of those things in there. And even then I still came and added lots of graphite or maybe a lot of ink over it and it ended up covering it, but I can still see it. And that's very satisfying as well. I like that a lot. Just knowing that even though it's kind of just a little ghostly shape there, I knew that I put that there and that it actually made a difference. It made a difference to put those little things there. So I'm hoping that as you create your drawings, whatever it is you want to draw, whatever it is you like to draw, whatever floats your boat, just know that it's all for a purpose. It's for a reason. It's to help your mind, to help your mindset, to help you be more centered. And in the process, you'll learn something about the kind of art that you like to create. I know that recently, or of late at least, I've been focusing a lot on drawing these sort of abstract forms, these organic forms. And this really does it a lot for me. I think that I will want to start exploring something that looks more like landscapes or sceneries, and we'll see where that takes me. But there is something about every journey. There is always something there to enjoy, something to learn. There's always something. So here is the end of this one. Yes, it's pretty shiny because I used a lot of pencil, and that's kind of part of that's how it goes. But I am fairly pleased with the outcome for this whole thing. It'll be really nice seeing what else I could do to create something like this. So I'm thinking that by the time that I do post this video, it won't be the day on which I created it, but the photo for this should probably already be available on my Instagram if you're interested in seeing that. You can see the photo for it. But here it is. This was the whole process from beginning to end, all the shading, all the line work, everything that went into it. And I'm so glad that you joined me for this one. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed it very much. And I really do hope you have an excellent day and an excellent weekend. And I hope to see you in the next one.